The first thing I remember is the light. Not warm light, not morning light, the kind of cold, flat, surgical white that has no business existing in nature. It pressed against my eyelids before I could open them. Then sound. A beeping, steady and mechanical, counting something I couldn't identify yet. My own heartbeat, I'd learn later. But in that moment, lying on my back on a surface too firm to be my bed, I didn't know where I was, what day it was, or why my arms felt like they were filled with wet concrete. I opened my eyes. Ceiling tiles. A fluorescent panel directly above me, one corner flickering slightly. An IV pole to my left, a clear bag dripping something into a tube that ran down to the back of my hand. My hand. I tried to lift it. My fingers curled, but my arm stayed where it was, heavy, disconnected, like it belonged to someone else and I was just borrowing it. A nurse moved into my peripheral vision. Blue scrubs. She was adjusting something on the monitor. She noticed my eyes were open and said, "Mrs. Calloway, you're at Memorial Health. You're safe. Try not to move too much." Mrs. Calloway? My name. Reese Calloway. I was 36 years old. I lived on Abercorn Street in Savannah, Georgia. I was a pediatric occupational therapist. I had a husband named Derek. These facts returned slowly, like objects floating to the surface of dark water. Then I saw him. Derek was sitting in the chair to my right. He was holding my other hand, the one without the IV. His face was arranged into perfect concern. Red-rimmed eyes, tight mouth, the slight forward lean of a man who hadn't slept all night because he was so worried about his wife. He squeezed my hand. "Baby, you collapsed. They think it might be your heart." I was so scared. His voice was warm. His eyes were doing something else. I didn't recognize it yet. I would. It was calculation. And then I noticed the third person in the room, standing at the foot of my bed, hands clasped in front of him. Dark. Jacket, badge clipped to his belt. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Derek, watching him the way you watch something you're about to pick up and examine very carefully. Patient. Still. He took one step forward. His eyes never left my husband. "Mr. Calloway." Derek looked up. His hand was still holding mine. "We found the bottle." 4 words. Derek's fingers went cold around mine. Not a flinch, not a jerk, just a slow, mechanical release. Like a machine powering down. His hand slid away from mine and settled on his own knee. "What bottle?" he said. But his voice had changed. The warmth was gone. What was left was flat. Clinical. The voice of a man running numbers in real time and not liking the answer. But before you can understand what that bottle was, what was in it, and why my husband had been putting it in my tea every night for 4 months, I need to take you back, 18 months, to a house on Abercorn Street in Savannah's historic district that looked like a postcard and held something much darker behind its freshly painted shutters. Before I go any further, I want to ask you something. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you stopped questioning anything they handed you? A glass, a pill, a story, a cup of tea? Hold that thought. You're going to need it. And if this story resonates with you, I'd appreciate it if you subscribed, not for the numbers, but because stories like this shouldn't stay buried. I grew up in Macon, Georgia. Magnolia Street, a white ranch house with green shutters and a porch swing that creaked when the wind picked up. My father, Henry Thornton, was a pharmacist at Ridley's Drug on Cherry Street for 30 years. He stood behind that counter 6 days a week, filling prescriptions, advising customers, knowing every medication by name, by dosage, by interaction. He could tell you what any sedative did to the central nervous system, what happened if you took too much, and what happened if someone gave it to you without your knowledge. He knew all of that. It would become the most painful knowledge of his life. My mother, Lorraine, taught kindergarten at Brookside Elementary. She smelled like finger paint and vanilla extract, and she believed, genuinely believed, that every person was exactly as good as they presented themselves to be. She gave people the benefit of the doubt the way some people give directions, freely, automatically, without considering that the person asking might not actually be lost. I inherited my mother's trust and my father's attention to detail. The problem was, I applied the detail to my work and the trust to my marriage. I should have done it the other way around. I became a pediatric occupational therapist. My job was helping children who struggled with things other kids took for granted: holding a spoon, buttoning a shirt, writing their name, sitting still long enough to hear a story. I worked at Coastal Kids Rehabilitation Center on Drayton Street in Savannah, and I was good at it because I understood something about people who struggle. They're not broken, they're just navigating a world that wasn't designed for them. That understanding made me a great therapist. It also made me a perfect target. I met Derek Calloway at a friend's wedding in Charleston in October 2017. He was 33, a senior financial planner at a wealth management firm in Savannah. Tall, lean, the kind of man who looked like he'd been assembled from a catalog of things women are supposed to want. Good jaw, good posture, good shoes. He asked me to dance during a song I don't remember, and by the second chorus, he'd made me feel like I was the only person in a room of 200. That's a skill, by the way. Making someone feel singular. It's not the same as love. It's closer to architecture. You build a room around a person, make the walls feel like warmth, make the ceiling feel like safety, and by the time they realize it's a cage, the door is already locked. But I didn't know that then. What I knew was that Derek Calloway remembered my coffee order after one date, brought my mother flowers the first time he visited Macon, asked my father thoughtful questions about pharmacology over Sunday dinner, and never once made me feel like I was competing for his attention. He was present, focused, the kind of man who made you feel managed without ever noticing the management. We married in April 2019 at a garden venue outside Savannah. 60 guests. Spanish moss hanging from the live oaks. My father walked me down the aisle and whispered, "You sure about this one, baby girl?" I laughed and said, "Daddy, he's a financial planner. He's the safest man I've ever met." My father squeezed my arm and said nothing. Henry Thornton never pushed. He just asked the right question once and let you live with the answer. We moved into a restored Victorian on Abercorn Street. 3 stories, original hardwood, a front porch with wrought iron railings, and a garden that I tended every Saturday morning. Purchase price, $520,000. Derek handled the mortgage. Derek handled all the finances. He said it made sense. You focus on your patients. I'll handle the numbers. That's what I do. It sounded reasonable. It sounded like partnership. It was neither. The first 3 years were good. Or they felt good, which I've learned is not the same thing. We traveled. We hosted dinner parties. Derek would grill on the back patio while our neighbor, Dot Pemberton, 71 years old and sharp as a scalpel wrapped in a cardigan, waved from her porch next door. "Y'all are the prettiest couple on this street," she'd say, rocking in her chair. Derek would smile and wave back. Charming. Always charming. I earned $78,000 a year. Derek earned $145,000. We were comfortable. I didn't track the details of our accounts because Derek showed me quarterly summaries that looked professional and thorough. I signed documents when he asked me to sign them. Tax, returns, insurance forms, beneficiary designations. In 2021, 2 years into our marriage, Derek sat me down at the kitchen table with a folder. "I'm setting up additional life insurance for both of us," he said. "It's standard. Every financial planner does this for their own family, just smart planning." He showed me the policy, $1.2 million on my life. He was the sole beneficiary. I signed it because my husband was a financial planner and he told me it was standard and I had no reason to believe otherwise. That signature almost killed me. The first time I felt something was wrong was a morning in June 2023. I woke up and couldn't remember going to bed. Not in a "I was so tired I don't remember falling asleep" way, in a black hole way. The last thing I remembered was sitting on the couch watching television with Derek. He'd made me tea, chamomile, the way he did every night. I'd taken a few sips. And then nothing. A gap. Like someone had cut a piece out of a film reel and spliced the ends together. I mentioned it to Derek over breakfast. "I don't even remember going to bed last night." He smiled, poured me coffee. "You were exhausted, babe. You fell asleep on the couch. I carried you up." He'd carried me upstairs. That was sweet. That was caring. I accepted it and went to work. But it happened again and again and again. By August, I was losing chunks of evenings 2 or 3 times a week. I'd be sitting at the kitchen table grading therapy reports, and then suddenly I'd be in bed with no memory of how I got there. My alarm would go off, and I'd feel like I'd been underwater all night, heavy, sluggish, like my blood had been replaced with something thicker. I started losing weight, 11 pounds in 2 months. My appetite vanished. I was dizzy at work. I forgot patient names I'd known for years. I walked into the supply room at Coastal Kids one afternoon and couldn't remember why I'd gone in there. I stood in the doorway for 30 seconds holding a clipboard, staring at shelves of therapy putty and weighted blankets, and my mind was just empty. A blank screen. My colleague, Tamara Osi, noticed. "Reese, you okay? You've been off for weeks." I told her I was tired, stressed. She looked at me for a beat too long but didn't push. I went to my doctor, Dr. Ashwin Mehta on Bull Street. He ran blood work, thyroid, iron, vitamin D, CBC, metabolic panel. Everything came back normal. He suggested stress, possibly early perimenopause, recommended I reduce my workload and get more rest. Derek drove me to that appointment. He sat in the exam room with me. When Dr. Mehta asked about my symptoms, Derek answered before I could. "She's been working 60-hour weeks. She doesn't sleep well. I've been trying to get her to slow down for months." He put his hand on my knee. Concerned husband. Devoted partner. Dr. Mehta looked at Derek and nodded. "She's lucky to have you watching out for her." Derek squeezed my knee. "That's my job." Nobody asked me what I thought was happening because my husband was already narrating my story for me, and the doctor was already listening to him instead of me. That's how it works. When a confident man speaks for a quiet woman, the room believes him, not because he's right, but because he's louder. I called my best friend Joss that night. Jocelyn Adeyemi, ER physician at Memorial Health, the woman who'd been my closest friend since our freshman dorm at Mercer University. She asked what the doctor said. I told her stress. She went quiet for a second, then said, "Reese, stress doesn't make you forget your own patients' names. Get a second opinion." I told her she was overreacting. She said, "I'm an ER doctor. I don't overreact. I triage." I laughed it off. I wish I hadn't. Every night, the tea. Chamomile. Derek would bring it to me on the couch, in bed, at the kitchen table. "Drink this, babe. It'll help you sleep." If I said I didn't want tea, he'd look wounded, hurt, like I was rejecting. Not a beverage, but his love. "I just want to take care of you, Reese. Please." So I'd drink it, every night, because refusing a cup of tea from your husband felt petty, ungrateful, paranoid. I didn't know that every cup contained temazepam, a benzodiazepine sedative. Derek had obtained a prescription from a walk-in clinic in Pooler, 15 miles outside Savannah, under a fabricated complaint of insomnia. He'd been dissolving the tablets into my tea. Small doses at first, 7.5 milligrams, barely enough to notice. Just enough to make me sleep deeply and wake up groggy. Over 4 months, he increased the dose methodically. By November, I was ingesting 30 milligrams nightly. My body was being systematically sedated by the man who kissed my forehead every morning and told me he loved me before he left for work. Dot Pemberton saw it. She didn't know what she was seeing, but she saw it. From her porch next door, rocking in her chair, she watched me stumble to the mailbox at 11 in the morning, looking like I hadn't slept in a week. She watched Derek hold my elbow as he guided me to the car, supporting me like I was elderly, like I was fragile, like I was his to manage. She told me later, months later, sitting on my new porch with peach cobbler between us, "I knew something was wrong, sweetheart. I just didn't know what. I thought maybe you were sick, really sick, and I didn't want to intrude, but I watched that house every day. I kept my phone on the table by the door. I don't know what I was waiting for. I just knew I was waiting." She was waiting for November 14th. She just didn't know it yet. I need to stop here because there's something you need to understand about Derek that I didn't know until the police investigation revealed it. Something that turns this story from a marriage gone wrong into something calculated, premeditated, and meticulously planned. And it starts with money. Derek Calloway had a gambling problem. Not the kind you see in movies, not the stumbling, desperate addict feeding quarters into a slot machine. Derek's gambling was clinical, Online poker first, then private high-stakes games in back rooms in Jacksonville, Atlanta, Charleston. He was disciplined at first, strategic, treating it like another form of financial planning. But the losses mounted. By 2022, 1 year before the tea started, Derek owed approximately $340,000 to 3 separate private gambling networks. Not casinos, private operators. The kind of people who don't send collection letters. They send reminders in person. He'd been making minimum payments from a hidden bank account, but the money was bleeding out faster than he could replace it. His salary couldn't cover the debts, the mortgage, the lifestyle, and the image simultaneously. Something had to give. The life insurance policy, $1.2 million. On me, his wife, the woman sleeping next to him every night who had no idea that the man holding her hand was calculating the value of her death. His plan, as reconstructed by the prosecution from browser history, financial records, and the dosing pattern, was this: chronic sedation over several months, building my tolerance gradually, creating a documented medical history of declining health, fatigue, cognitive issues, weight loss, so that when the final dose came, the one large enough to cause respiratory failure, it would look like the tragic end of a long illness. A woman who'd been struggling for months, found unresponsive in her home, accidental overdose perhaps, or natural cardiac event in a weakened body, a grieving husband, a $1.2 million payout, debts cleared, fresh start. He almost succeeded. If it weren't for a 71-year-old retired music teacher who kept her phone by the door and her eyes on the house next door, he would have. If you've ever had someone in your life who seemed to care too much, who insisted on managing your health, your schedule, your rest, who made every decision feel like protection when it was actually control, I need you to pause right now. Not because I want to scare you, because I want you to think about the cup of tea in your own life, the thing someone hands you with a smile that you've never thought to question. Are you thinking about it? Good. Stay with me. Drop a comment and tell me, who in your life has disguised control as care? I read every single one. November 14th, 2023, a Tuesday. I came home from work at 6:30 in the evening. I remember the magnolia tree in the front yard had dropped its last leaves. The porch light was on. Through the front window, I could see candles lit in the dining room. Derek was cooking. Pasta, garlic bread. The house smelled like olive oil and rosemary. He met me at the door, took my bag, kissed my temple. "You look tired," he said. "You should sleep early tonight. I'll take care of everything." I ate dinner. I don't remember what we talked about. That's one of the things the sedation had taken from me, the ability to hold on to conversations. Words would enter my ears and dissolve before they reached my memory. I nodded. I smiled. I performed the role of a woman having dinner with her husband, and Derek performed the role of a man who loved his wife. After dinner, the tea. He brought it to me on the couch. Chamomile. The ceramic mug with the blue rim, the one I'd bought at a craft fair on River Street our first year in Savannah. He set it on the side table next to me. "Drink it while it's warm, babe." I picked it up. The first sip tasted off, bitter. I said so. "This tastes different." "New brand," he said. "The store was out of the usual one. Try it." I took another sip, bigger this time. Set the mug down. Within 20 minutes, the room started to tilt. Not spin, tilt, like the floor was slowly becoming a ramp. My fingers tingled. My vision softened at the edges, shapes losing their borders. I tried to stand. My legs didn't respond the way they should have. I reached for the kitchen counter, my hand. Missed by 6 inches. My knees buckled. I hit the hardwood floor. The side of my head struck the leg of a dining chair. I felt it but distantly, like the pain was happening to someone next to me. The last thing I heard before the dark swallowed me was Derek's voice. Calm, measured, almost gentle. "It's okay, Reese. Just let go. Just let go." Those weren't the words of a panicked husband watching his wife collapse. Those were the words of a man watching his plan reach its conclusion. I know that now. I didn't know it then, because then I was already gone, falling into a blackness so complete it felt like being erased. What I didn't hear was what happened next. Dot Pemberton heard the crash. The sound of my body hitting the floor, the chair scraping across the hardwood, it carried through the thin walls of our shared Victorian houses. Dot was in her kitchen, heating soup. She turned off the burner, stood still, and listened. Silence. No voices. No movement. She picked up the phone and called 911 at 9:47 p.m. "Something happened next door," she told the dispatcher. "I heard a loud crash, and now there's nothing. No sound at all. Something's wrong." Paramedics arrived in 7 minutes. Derek opened the door. He told them his wife had fainted. He was calm. Appropriate concern, appropriate urgency. He'd moved me from the floor to the couch. He'd elevated my feet. He'd done everything a caring husband would do, everything except call 911 himself. My blood oxygen was at 84%. Normal is 95 to 100. At 84%, my organs were starving. Another hour, maybe 2, and the damage would have been irreversible. Another 3 hours and I would have been a line item on a life insurance claim. Dot Pemberton's phone call saved my life. 7 digits dialed by a 71-year-old woman who trusted her instinct over her politeness. That's the margin I survived by. Not medicine, not luck. A neighbor who refused to mind her own business. I woke up 12 hours later in Memorial Health. University Medical Center, room 4, second floor. The ceiling tiles, the beeping, the IV Derek in the chair, the officer at the foot of the bed. You know this part. You were there at the beginning. But here's what happened in those 12 hours while I was unconscious. The paramedics flagged my blood work, elevated benzodiazepine levels in a woman with no prescription for benzodiazepines. That flag went to the attending physician, who noted it in my chart, which was reviewed the next morning by the on-call toxicologist. Standard protocol. Except the toxicologist happened to mention it to my best friend, Joss. The same Joss who'd told me weeks earlier to get a second opinion. The same Joss who'd said stress doesn't make you forget your patients' names. She was off duty but came in the moment she heard I'd been admitted. She read my chart. She read the toxicology results. And then she stood very still in the hallway outside my room for a full minute, thinking. She told me later what went through her mind. "I've seen these symptoms 100 times in the ER, Reese. Chronic fatigue, cognitive decline, memory loss, weight loss, dizziness, and now acute benzodiazepine toxicity. When I see it in a patient, I think drug interaction or substance issue. But you don't take benzos. You barely take ibuprofen. And the levels in your blood weren't consistent with a single dose. They were consistent with chronic exposure. Someone had been giving you this drug over a period of months." Joss pulled Detective Ray Castillo aside in the hallway. Castillo was 44, Chatham County Criminal Investigations, 18 years on the force. He'd come to the hospital as a standard welfare check triggered by the paramedic flag. He expected a conversation, a report, maybe a referral to social services. He did not expect what Joss told him. "This isn't a fainting episode, Detective. This woman has been systematically poisoned. The sedative levels indicate chronic exposure over at least 3 to 4 months. Someone has been dosing her." Castillo looked at the closed door of my hospital room. Behind that door, Derek sat in his chair holding my hand, performing. "Who has regular, unsupervised access to her food and drink?" Joss didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both looked at the door. Castillo obtained a search warrant within 4 hours. He went to the house on Abercorn Street with 2 officers. In the master bathroom, behind Derek's shaving kit in the medicine cabinet, they found a prescription bottle. Temazepam, 30 milligram tablets. Prescribed to Derek Calloway by Dr. Franklin Suarez at the same walk-in clinic in Pooler. The same fabricated insomnia complaint. The same calculated lie, just on a different form. The bottle was half empty. The prescription had been filled 8 weeks prior. At the prescribed rate of 1 tablet nightly, the bottle should have been roughly 1/4 used. It was half gone. He'd been consuming them twice as fast as a single-person dosage would require. The excess wasn't going into Derek. It was going into my tea. Castillo returned to the hospital. He walked through the corridor past the nurse's station, past the waiting area where 2 other families sat in their own private emergencies, and he entered my room. Derek was still there, still holding my hand, still performing. He'd been performing for 12 hours straight. Most people can't sustain a lie for 12 minutes. Derek held his for half a day without a crack showing. Castillo walked to the foot of the bed. "Mr. Calloway." Derek looked up. "We found the bottle." I watched it happen, the hand going cold, the slow release, the calculation behind his eyes failing to produce a viable output. "What bottle?" "Mr. Calloway, I need you to step outside with me." Derek stood. He straightened his shirt. He looked at me once, and I finally recognized the expression I'd been unable to name since I'd woken up. It wasn't concern. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't love. It was annoyance. The look of a man whose spreadsheet didn't balance. An error in his calculations. I was the error. I was supposed to be dead, and instead I was awake, and a detective was standing at the foot of my bed, and the bottle was found, and the math no longer worked. He was arrested in the hospital corridor. 2 officers. Handcuffs. He didn't struggle. He didn't shout. He turned his head once and looked at me through the glass partition. I looked back. For the entire time I'd known that man, I'd looked at that face and seen safety. Now I saw blueprints. Cold, precise blueprints for a building that was supposed to collapse with me inside it. The investigation unraveled Derek's life like pulling a thread from a suit that looked expensive, until you realized it was held together by nothing. The gambling debts. $340,000, 3 private networks, payment records on a hidden bank account, the life insurance policy, $1.2 million, taken out on me 2 years prior with Derek as sole beneficiary, and then the browser history, recovered by digital forensics from his work laptop, searches he'd deleted but that lived on in the machine's memory like ghosts that refused to leave, temazepam lethal dose, benzodiazepine tolerance building, accidental overdose versus intentional. How long before sedatives cause organ failure? Chronic sedation undetectable. Life insurance claim after spousal death. 6 months of searches, methodical, spaced out, researched the way a financial planner would research an investment, risk assessment, return projection, timeline to execution. My husband had planned my death the way he planned a client's retirement portfolio, with charts, with patience, with projected outcomes. Vivian Calloway arrived from Charleston 48 hours after the arrest. Derek's mother, 65 years old, retired real estate agent, the kind of woman who wore pearls to the grocery store and believed that appearances were the only truth that mattered. She hired a defense attorney before she visited her son. She visited the attorney's office first, then the jail. She came to the hospital once. She didn't bring flowers. She brought an accusation. "Reese, I don't know what's happening here, but I know my son. Derek would never hurt anyone. You must have taken those pills yourself." I was still in bed, IV still attached. My blood oxygen had stabilized, but my body felt like it had been drained and refilled with something heavier. I looked at Vivian, this woman who had sat at my wedding and dabbed her eyes and told me she was gaining a daughter, and I said, "Vivian, your son put sedatives in my tea for 4 months. The police found the bottle. The toxicology confirms it. You can believe whatever you need to believe, but the chemistry doesn't care what you believe." She left without responding. The click of her heels in the hospital hallway was the last sound I ever heard from Vivian Calloway, but she wasn't done. She confronted Joss in the parking lot the next day. Joss was coming off a 12-hour ER shift, running on coffee and fury. Vivian stepped in front of her car. "You put ideas in her head. She was fine until you got involved. My son was taking care of her." Joss rolled down her window. She later told me she considered being diplomatic for about half a second. Then she said, "Ma'am, your son was poisoning his wife. The toxicology report isn't an idea, it's chemistry. Now please move. I have patients who are actually sick because of things nobody did to them on purpose." Vivian moved. Joss drove home. She called me from her kitchen and said, "I just told your mother-in-law that chemistry doesn't lie. I think she's going to need a minute." Dot Pemberton gave her statement to Detective Castillo the following week. She sat in the Chatham County precinct in a blue cardigan and orthopedic shoes and described, with the precision of a woman who'd spent 40 years teaching children to listen, carefully, what she'd observed over the previous 4 months. She was getting worse. Week by week. I've lived next to that house for 9 years. I knew Reese when she was bright, sharp, the kind of woman who waved good morning and meant it. By September, she could barely get the mail. She'd stand at the mailbox looking confused, like she'd forgotten what she went out there for. He was always there, holding her arm, gating her, At first I thought he was devoted. Then I thought he was managing her. Then I thought something I didn't want to think, and then I heard the crash. She paused. Castillo waited. I kept my phone by the door, detective. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but I was waiting. Castillo told me later, when the case was closed and the formality had softened into something more human, that Dot's testimony was the emotional center of the prosecution's case. 12 jurors listened to a 71-year-old retired music teacher describe how she kept her phone by the door for 4 months because she had a feeling. Half the jury was crying. Your neighbor is the reason your husband is in prison. My parents came from Macon. They arrived the day after I woke up. My mother held me in the hospital bed and rocked me like I was 5 years old. She didn't ask questions. She just held on. My father was different. Henry Thornton, the pharmacist, the man who'd spent 30 years behind a counter knowing exactly what every pill in that store could do to a human body, sat in the hospital chair and read my toxicology report. I watched his face as he processed it. He went very still, the kind of still that comes before something breaks or before something is decided. Temazepam, he said quietly, 30 milligrams nightly for approximately 4 months. Yes, Daddy. He was building tolerance, increasing the dose incrementally so your body would adjust and the final dose could be higher without triggering an acute reaction. Yes, he was building up to a lethal dose. That's what the prosecution believes. My father closed the report, set it on the bedside table, took off his reading glasses and folded them with the careful precision of a man who was holding himself together, one small action at a time. I sold that drug for 30 years. I put it in bags. I stapled receipts. I told patients about side effects, interactions, warnings, and someone used it to poison my daughter. His voice cracked on the last word. First time I'd ever heard it crack. Henry Thornton, the steadiest man I'd ever known, cracked. He stood up. I need a minute. He left the room. My mother told me later that he went to the hospital chapel and sat there for 40 minutes. A man who hadn't been to church in 15 years sat in a chapel and stared at the cross on the wall. He didn't pray. He didn't kneel. He just sat with his hands folded, processing the intersection of his life's work and his daughter's near death. And when he came back to my room, his eyes were red and his voice was steady, and he never mentioned the chapel again. But from that day forward, every time my father visited, he brought me tea. A different kind each time, from a specialty shop on Cotton Avenue in Macon that he'd personally visited, personally inspected, personally verified every ingredient on every label. He'd hand me the box and say, "This one's chamomile and lavender." I checked. Nothing in it but flowers. He never said why he was doing this. He didn't need to. A pharmacist father bringing his poisoned daughter verified tea was the loudest act of love I'd ever witnessed. He looked at me through that glass the way you'd look at a math problem you got wrong. Not sorry, not ashamed, annoyed. Like I was an error in his calculations. If you've ever seen the real face behind someone's mask, the moment the performance dropped and you saw what was actually underneath, tell me what you saw. I want to know. The trial was 5 months later, April 2024. Chatham County Superior Court. Derek pleaded not guilty. His defense argued the temazepam was prescribed for his own insomnia and that I must have taken the pills myself, voluntarily or accidentally. His attorney suggested I was depressed, self-medicating, that the collapse was self-inflicted. The prosecution presented the browser history, the pill count discrepancy, the financial records, the gambling debts, the life insurance policy, Joss's expert testimony on chronic sedative exposure, Dot's testimony about what she saw from her porch, my toxicology results, the timeline, the math, Derek's math turned against him, 12 jurors, 4 hours of deliberation, guilty, attempted murder, aggravated assault, insurance fraud, all 3 counts, sentencing 18 years. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing. I was at work. I had a patient that morning, a 7-year-old girl named Amira who'd been working for 3 months to hold a pencil steady enough to write her own name. That, Tuesday, she did it. She wrote AMIRA on a sheet of lined paper, shaky but legible, and looked up at me with a grin so wide it could have powered every light in the building. I put my hand on her shoulder and said, "You did that, all you." Joss texted me the verdict during my lunch break. I read it in the break room, standing next to the microwave, holding a container of leftover pasta. I read it twice. I nodded once. I put my phone away and went back to my afternoon patients. That's not bravery. It's priority. I'd spent 4 months being managed by a man who decided my life was worth $1.2 million and nothing more. I chose to spend that afternoon with a child who'd just learned to write her name. One of those things is about endings. The other is about beginnings. I chose the beginning. 6 months after the trial, October 2024. I live in a cottage on Tybee Island, 20 minutes east of Savannah. 2 bedrooms, a screened porch, the sound of the ocean at night. I bought it with my own money, my own name on the deed, nobody else's signature anywhere near it. It's 1,100 square feet. After the Victorian on Abercorn Street, it should feel like a downgrade. It doesn't. It feels like the exact right amount of space for a woman who's relearning how much room she actually needs. I'm back at Coastal Kids full-time. I got promoted to clinical director in August. I manage a team of 8 therapists now. Tamara Osi, the colleague who noticed I was off a year ago, is my deputy. She told me on my first day back, I should have pushed harder. I knew something was wrong. I told her, you saw it. That matters. You just didn't have enough information to know what you were seeing. She nodded. We didn't talk about it again. We didn't need to. Dot Pemberton drives to Tybee Island once a month. She brings peach cobbler from a bakery on Bull Street, and she stays for 2 hours. We sit on the screened porch and listen to the waves. She doesn't ask about Derek. She asks about my garden, about my patients, about whether the stray cat that's been circling the porch has a name yet. He does. Cobbler, named after the dessert, obviously. Dot approved. Joss and I have a standing Saturday morning breakfast at a diner on Butler Avenue called The Sunrise. She orders the same thing every week, 2 eggs over easy, sourdough toast, black coffee, and complains about the same things every week, her schedule, her dating life, her neighbor's wind chimes. It is the most normal, boring, beautiful routine I've ever had. We don't talk about the case unless I bring it up. I rarely do. There's nothing left to analyze. The chemistry told the truth. The jury believed it. The rest is time. My parents visit every other weekend. My mother brings quilting supplies and talks too much and rearranges my kitchen cabinets every single visit. And I let her because the sound of my mother opening and closing cabinet doors is the opposite of silence. And silence is something I'm still learning to trust again. My father brings tea. Every visit, a new kind, personally inspected, and he watches me drink the first cup with an expression that's trying very hard to be casual and failing completely. Henry Thornton is many things. A good actor is not one of them, and that's fine. I've had enough good actors for one lifetime. It's a Sunday evening, October on Tybee Island. The air is salt and warm wood, and the last of the summer heat giving way to something cooler. Cobbler is curled on the porch chair, one eye open, watching a lizard on the railing with zero intention of doing anything about it. The ocean is doing what the ocean always does, coming in, going out, indifferent to everything that's happened on the land beside it. I'm sitting on the porch holding a glass of water, not tea, water. Clear, simple, nothing dissolved in it that I didn't put there myself. Maybe I'll drink tea again someday. Maybe Daddy's inspected boxes of chamomile and lavender will eventually feel safe enough to brew. Not yet, but maybe. I think about the house on Abercorn Street sometimes, the candles on the dining table, the smell of rosemary, a voice saying, "You look tired, you should sleep early." I think about how care and control can sound identical, how the same sentence, "I just want to take care of you," can mean love in one mouth and something unforgivable in another. And I think about Dot, 71 years old, retired music teacher, sitting on her porch in a cardigan with a phone by the door and a feeling she couldn't name. She didn't have evidence. She didn't have proof. She had attention. She watched. She waited. And when the moment came, she didn't second-guess herself. She called. That's the thing nobody tells you about being saved. It doesn't always come from hospitals or courtrooms or lawyers or justice. Sometimes it comes from a neighbor who keeps her phone by the door. Sometimes it comes from a friend who reads a chart and connects. Dots nobody else bothered to connect. Sometimes it comes from a father who starts checking tea labels because the world stopped making sense, and this was the one thing he could control. I was handed a cup of tea by a man who wanted me dead, and I'm still here. Not because I was strong, though I'd like to think I am. Not because I was smart, though I'm learning to be. I'm here because the people around me refused to look away. They paid attention when I couldn't pay attention to myself. And that, more than any verdict or sentence or locked cell door, is what saved my life. If you're listening to this and something in your life feels slightly off, a gesture that seems too careful, a kindness that comes with conditions, a tiredness you can't explain, a fog that rolls in every night after the same routine, I'm not telling you to panic. I'm telling you to pay attention. Trust the feeling that something isn't right, even when the person handing you the cup is smiling, especially when they're smiling. And if you're someone's Dot Pemberton, if you're watching from your porch, if you have a feeling you can't name, if you're keeping your phone by the door without knowing why, don't talk yourself out of it. Make the call. You might be the 7 digits between someone and something irreversible. Now, I have a question for you. Who in your life noticed something was wrong before you did? Who was your Dot Pemberton, the person watching quietly, waiting for the moment that mattered? Tell me about them in the comments. They deserve to be named. And if this story made you think about someone you haven't checked on in a while, call them tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Sometimes the difference between a tragedy and a survival story is one phone call made at 9:47 on a Tuesday night. I'll see you in the next one.